Today I want to work through the advantages and the disadvantages of Tyler Durden's philosophy, Fight Club, and Project Mayhem. Clearly there's some very appealing elements of Durden's philosophy and the solutions he comes up with, and hopefully you are recognizing that there are some downsides. Hopefully this lecture will help to illuminate and also organize the various advantageous and disadvantageous aspects of Tyler's philosophy. So what I want to do here is close read a number of passages, just talking about Durdenism in general, i.e. Tyler Durden's philosophy, and his general approach for how to help enlighten the individuals that he comes across. And then second, we'll start to look at passages pertaining more specifically to Fight Club and Project Mayhem, and along the way I'll be connecting these ideas to various philosophical theories that I think help to make sense of what is going on here, and I think are well reflected within the text itself. So with that, let's start with chapter 9, and this is the scene where Tyler pours the lie over the narrator's hand, and it creates that chemical burn. And so what I want to do here is read the passage and figure out what's going on. So, right off the bat, it says right here, we are on page 74. Combined with water, lye heats to over 200 degrees, and as it heats, it burns into the back of my hand, and Tyler places his finger of one hand over my fingers, our hands spread on the lap of my blood-stained pants, and Tyler says to pay attention, because this is the greatest moment of my life. Now, obviously, this seems paradoxical, that this moment of severe pain and suffering could be the greatest moment of the narrator's life, so we need to understand why Tyler thinks that this moment of extreme pain is important. Because everything up to now is a story, Tyler says, and everything after now is a story. This is the greatest moment of our life. Notice the shared first-person plural there, both Tyler and the narrator being the same person. The lie clinging in the exact shape of Tyler's kiss is a bonfire or a branding iron or an atomic pile meltdown on my hand at the end of a long, long road I picture miles away from me. Tyler tells me to come back and be with him. My hand is leaving, tiny, and on the horizon at the end of the road. Picture the fire still burning, except now it's beyond the horizon, a sunset. Come back to the pain, Tyler says. This is the kind of guided meditation they use at support groups. Don't even think of the word pain. Guided meditation works for cancer. It can work for this. Look at your hand, Tyler says. Don't look at your hand. Don't think of the word searing or flesh or tissue or charred. Don't hear yourself cry. Guided meditation. So notice the two different approaches that are going on here. In my mind, the narrator, what's going on is he keeps trying to escape the pain, and I think guided meditation is a good symbol of that. Throughout, I guess before Fight Club and before he encountered Tyler Durden, his main response to the pain and suffering and lifelessness and nihilism that he was experiencing within his life was through escapism. And not only the cancer support groups, i.e. an inauthentic lie as a way to try to cope with that pain, but also the guided meditation, I think, are both good examples of methods that try to escape one's reality. If you remember the guided meditation, he would go into his ice cave, be the penguin spirit animal, and just slide. Clearly a symbol of escapism. It is a fantasy of sorts. Tyler, meanwhile, keeps trying to make him come back to the pain, and the pain here is clearly linked to reality, right? Pain is what the narrator is actually experiencing and what is going on within real life. And so I think if we were to take notes on this passage, it would be about the narrator's guided meditation is an example of a fantasy or an escape from reality, whereas Tyler trying to make the narrator cognizant of the pain is about getting him in touch with reality. Let's keep going. If you flip the page to 76, bottom of the page for me, we can see Tyler says, listen to me. Open your eyes. Clearly a good figurative symbol for understanding and comprehension and knowledge, right? Tyler's saying, become aware of what's actually going on here. In ancient history, Tyler says, human sacrifices were made on a hill above a river. Thousands of people. Listen to me. The sacrifices were made and the bodies were burned on a pyre. You can cry, Tyler says. You can go to the sink and run water over your hand, but first you have to know that you're stupid and you will die. Look at me. Someday, Tyler says, you will die, and until you know that, you're useless to me. So, okay, another interesting line. Tyler is trying to make him aware not just of the searing pain on his hand, but to use that pain as a symbol of the inevitability of the narrator's death. This doesn't seem like a particular happy moment, but remember Tyler's contention that this is the greatest moment of his life. And let's look one page later on page 77 at this line. It says, "This is the greatest moment of your life," Tyler says, "and you're off somewhere missing it." So why would experiencing searing pain and the inevitability of death, and Tyler seems to be implying a sort of insignificance there, right? You're stupid and you will die. He's not saying that death is something grand and magnificent. This isn't the beginning to some superb afterlife. No, this is probably just at some point you will die and fade into nothing. And that is all your existence is, which seems very negative and nihilistic. But what I want to show is that actually this is the starting point in Tyler Durden's mind, that one has to confront the realities of existence, which is the inevitability of pain, suffering, and death, which could lead to the conclusion that our lives are perhaps not very significant. Now, why would that be a good starting moment? Why is that a good starting place to a more authentic form of life is something that we still have to explore. But certainly, Tyler is arguing here that that confrontation with the inevitability of one's insignificance, perhaps meaninglessness, the inevitability of death and pain and suffering is an important moment. In fact, perhaps the greatest moment of one's life. And my argument is going to be because it is a liberating force. And we're going to see why in a second. Regardless, the important thing is that the narrator at this point is too afraid to actually confront it. He continues to try to lean back on those escapist mechanisms. So that's one aspect of the Durden philosophy. Now, why does that help to liberate you? Let's see. If we go to chapter 14, we've actually already looked at this passage. It's right at the end of this chapter. You can see here that as the narrator's on the phone with a detective investigating how the narrator's apartment blew up, and by the way, now we know in hindsight that it was not an accidental gas explosion. It was in fact planted by Tyler, which means it was planted by the narrator himself because he felt he couldn't escape his little tiny life there. But regardless, let's take a look at the kind of philosophy of Tyler. We've seen this before, but let's look at it again. To understand why that confrontation with pain and suffering and death can actually be a liberating force. So Tyler here says, "I'm breaking my attachment to physical power and possessions," Tyler whispered, "because only through destroying myself can I discover the greater power of my spirit." By the way, we're on page 110. Let's skip down. Next one. "The liberator who destroys my property," Tyler said, "is fighting to save my spirit. The teacher who clears all possessions from my path will set me free." And then the detective said, "Whoever set the homemade dynamite could have turned on the gas and blown out the pilot lights on the stove days before the explosion took place. The gas was just the trigger. It would take days for the gas to fill the condo before it reached the compressor at the base of the refrigerator, and the compressor's electric motor set off the explosion." "Tell him," Tyler whispered. "Yes, you did it. You blew it all up." That's what he wants to hear. Now notice, the first time you read this seemed like an ironic line, right? But now we recognize that Tyler's actually being serious. The narrator did do it. "I tell the detective no. I did not leave the gas on and then leave town. I loved my life. I loved that condo. I loved every stick of furniture. That was my whole life, everything. The lamps, the chairs, the rugs were me. The dishes in the cabinet were me. The plants were me. The television was me. It was me that blew up. Couldn't he see that?" The detective said not to leave town. So we don't totally understand the connection yet, why that extreme moment of agony and pain and suffering and confronting the inevitability of one's death is linked to this liberation from property and possessions and all the shallow things that the narrator describes down here. But hopefully in a couple of more passages, we're going to see the connection. Regardless, I think it's important to understand what Durden's philosophy is all about, and it's about a sort of detachment or liberation from shallow forms of living or shallow forms of attachments, right? Possessions, consumerist objects, all of these things that the narrator down here says defined him clearly are not good, are not fulfilling the narrator's deeper spiritual desires. And so I think Tyler is all about trying to liberate oneself from that. Let's go now to chapter 18, and now we can start to see the connection a little bit better between what Tyler was doing earlier with the soap on the narrator's hand and the connection between a liberation from shallow or inauthentic forms of living. So in chapter 18, if you go to page 140, we get a nice line that helps to articulate the significance of a universe that perhaps has no place for humanity, i.e., our death is not anything meaningful or significant. So on 140, this is the car mechanic driving the narrator around, and if you remember, the car mechanic begins to drive the car into oncoming traffic, which is a literal confrontation with death and one's mortality. And so the car mechanic here starts spouting pure Durden philosophy. Like, this is clearly not come up. He did not come up with this. This is all from Tyler. He says, "What you have to understand is your father was your model for God. Now, you all should remember all of the figurative analysis we've done with God. God is much more than a literal figure within the Christian universe. God is a symbol for order and structure and morality and guidance and purpose and meaning and all of those things that we were talking about, right? God implies that there is some deeper metaphysical structure and reason for us being here within the universe. God provides us ready-made meaning. Behind us, my job and my office are smaller, 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 gone. I sniff the gasoline on my hands." The mechanic says, "If you're male and you're Christian and living in America, your father is your model for God. And if you never knew your father, if your father bails out or dies or is never at home, what do you believe about God?" This is all Tyler Durden dogma, scrawled on bits of paper while I was asleep and given to me to type and photocopy at work. I've read it all. Even my boss has probably read it all. "What you end up doing," the mechanic says, "is you spend your life searching for a father and God. What you have to consider," he says, "is the possibility that God doesn't like you. Could be God hates us. This is not the worst thing that can happen." So just by the way, not only is this articulating the same dilemmas that I think we saw in both T.S. Eliot and Nietzsche in terms of the metaphorical death of God, i.e. the loss of ready-made purpose and meaning that the past used to provide, right? Without a God providing clarity in terms of our meaning and purpose, there's the possibility that our lives have no meaning or have no plan. There is no structure or order for us. Yes, society through consumerism and capitalism would like us to believe there's a nice little plan. Go to high school, go to college, get a nice job, get a 401k, get a house, get a car, get a wife, so on and so forth. But the reality is that is just something that we have made up and has actually enslaved us in a certain way, at least according to the narrator and Tyler. But also appreciate the Freudian connection here in terms of connecting one's view of God as a metaphysical force to one's own experience with their parents. That's a very Freudian idea, right? That your early childhood experiences based on your parents could shape your later views of something as significant as religion. And let's go down a couple lines here to this highlighted line. "We are God's middle children," according to Tyler Durden, "with no special place in history and no special attention." And that sums it up well. I think this passage is articulating the crisis of modernity that we have been discussing about living in a world without any clarity or any deeper sense of purpose or meaning. Let's go 2 pages further to 143, and we'll see here the car mechanic continues as they begin driving into oncoming traffic. According to the mechanic, another new Fight Club rule is that Fight Club will always be free. It will never cost to get in. The mechanic yells out the driver's window into the oncoming traffic and the night wind pouring down the side of the car. "We want you, not your money." The mechanic yells out the window. "As long as you're at Fight Club, you're not how much money you've got in the bank. You're not your job. You're not your family, and you're not who you tell yourself." So notice again, Fight Club and the philosophy of Tyler Durden is about detaching from shallow forms of identity or shallow forms of expression, particularly the monetary capitalistic ones that define one's worth based on their literal money or their job or their family, so on and so forth. The mechanic yells into the wind, "You're not your name." A space monkey in the back seat picks it up. "You're not your problems." The mechanic yells, "You're not your problems." A space monkey shouts, "You're not your age." The mechanic yells, "You're not your age." Here the mechanic swerves us into the oncoming lane, filling the car with headlights through the windshield, cool as ducking jabs. One car and then another comes at us head-on, screaming its horn, and the mechanic swerves just enough to miss each one. So notice, in this scene, the author is dramatizing this detachment from shallow forms of identity to, or is connecting it to this confrontation with one's mortality, which is what Tyler was talking about in the scene with the lye burn on the narrator's hand. Headlights come at us, bigger and bigger, horns screaming, and the mechanic cranes forward into the glare and noise and screams, "You are not your hopes." No one takes up the yell. This time the car coming on, or head-on, swerves in time to save us. Another car comes on, headlights blinking, high, low, horn blaring, and the mechanic screams, "You will not be saved." So notice that idea, linked especially to the absence of God or the absence of some universal plan. There is no sense of redemption or being saved within the universe. There's nothing like that within the universe that they are living in. Instead, what exists is the potential that there is no plan, or we live insignificant or meaningless lives. The mechanic doesn't swerve, but the head-on car swerves. Another car and the mechanic screams, "We are all going to die someday." So notice that repeat of the Durden mantra, or the importance of confronting one's death. Clearly, Fight Club, even though you might not confront your literal death, certainly is getting in touch with these same elements of confronting pain and suffering and perhaps even annihilation. This time the oncoming car swerves, but the mechanic swerves back into its path. The car swerves and the mechanic matches it head-on again. You melt and swell at that moment. For that moment, nothing matters. Look up at the stars and you're gone. Not your luggage. Nothing matters. Not your bad breath. The windows are dark outside and the horns are blaring around you. The headlights are flashing high and low and high in your face, and you will never have to go to work again. Notice, if you're being an astute reader here, you will realize that this is a throwback. Verbatim, the same language is used as when the narrator was imagining being on a plane and the plane crashing. When he is going from place to place at the behest of his boss for his job, he articulates these same lines. Now, notice what is different is that back in those early scenes, that was just a fantasy in the narrator's mind. He was just imagining things. Here, the confrontation with mortality has now become quite real, as they are literally staring head-on at oncoming traffic. You will never have to get another haircut. Quick, the mechanic says. The car swerves again and the mechanic swerves back into its path. What, he says, what will you wish you had done before you died? With the oncoming car screaming its horn and the mechanic so cool, he even looks away to look at me beside him in the front seat, and he says, 10 seconds to impact, 9, in 8, 7, in 6. My job, I say. I wish I'd quit my job. And so I think this is the line that helps us to understand why Tyler Durden is so adamant about confronting the realities of existence through pain and suffering and death. And that brings us, I think we can go to one note. I think this philosophy is heavily influenced by existentialism. I wouldn't say Tyler is necessarily a pure existentialist. I think there's some difference, but existentialism certainly has some elements that are very similar here. And here are the elements that are similar. Existentialists would start with the premise of the universe's indifference. If you remember, Albert Camus is heavily influenced by the existentialist form of thought and is often grouped with the existentialists, even if his philosophy of absurdism, in my opinion, has certain differences. But the starting place of existentialism is at some point you will confront the inevitability of your death and the universe's indifference. The key idea there, which is what we have been seeing within those passages again and again, is any sort of lack of inherent plan, right? God has no special place for us. There is nothing meaningful about our life or our death, and there's potentially no meaning within our lives. Yes, we can try to fill it with consumerist items and objects, but that is ultimately distracting us from the inevitability of this event that actually defines our entire existence. And the existentialists would say that leads to profound angst, right? We will feel deep and profound anxiety at confronting these facts of our existence that lead to the conclusion that perhaps everything is meaningless. And there are two ways we will react to this angst. The first way, which is the bad path, is acting in what the existentialists call bad faith. And that is trying to ignore the inevitability of your death or the universe's indifference and let somebody else make choices for you. And so either of those in the existentialist mind are acting in bad faith, either deluding yourself or letting somebody else make choices for you so that you don't have to ultimately make any tough calls yourself. And those are inauthentic forms of existence. And so what would this look like, right? This would be turning to, say, your boss or your teachers or your coaches as a way to create meaning for yourself, never questioning for yourself why something is important, right? Your parents tell you you should go be a doctor. You say, okay, my parents said this, it will make me money. Society says making money is good. I'll just go and make money. And then I don't have to confront these deeper questions about what my life means, right? Because my parents and my teachers and society all told me that being a doctor would be a good thing, so why not do it? That would be an example of acting in bad faith. The second option, which the existentialists certainly prefer, is that actually confronting the inevitability of your death, if you are able to courageously confront that angst. This is very much like Ernest Hemingway's philosophy in The Sun Also Rises, metaphorically confronting the bulls. Well, what is the biggest bull we all have to face? The inevitability of death and potentially the insignificance of our lives. But what the existentialists would say is that this can actually be liberating. Why? Because once you confront the inevitability of your death and you think really critically about, geez, I only have a limited amount of time to live on this earth, my life is finite, then it will actually free you to live a more authentic existence. Imagine this. If you knew you were going to die within a year, how would the way that you live your life change? Would you spend all of your time doing assignments that don't have much meaning? Would you spend your time just going down the YouTube rabbit hole when you could be traveling or doing something exciting outside or with friends? Probably not, right? And so that's what the existentialist philosophy is all about, is that actually in confronting death and pain and suffering, by experiencing that negative emotion of angst, it will actually awaken us to be more intentional and conscientious about the way that we live our life. We won't do things that are petty or get in the way of a more authentic form of existence. We won't waste our time on things that we'll ultimately regret spending our times on. Instead, just like the narrator in that last scene that we were looking at, in the metaphorical head-on collision with the car, he will realize that his greatest regret was that he didn't quit the job that he hated. And so that's a question that the existentialists want everyone to consider, right? If you truly confront your mortality, will you awaken yourself to the facts that you do things that you hate, or you live not for yourself, but based on the choices that others have already laid out for you? If that's the case, right, this is certainly one way to free yourself from that. And we can see one more example of this, right, with Raymond K. Hessel. And so this is in chapter 19. Chapter 20. Next chapter here. Oh, no, wait. Actually, let's go to chapter 19. There's another great line from the car mechanic that I think, again, helps to sum up a lot of these thoughts. So the car mechanic, this on page 149, says, again, this is more Durden philosophy, right? The mechanic starts talking, and it's pure Tyler Durden. I see the strongest and the smartest men who ever lived, he says, his face outlined against the stars in the driver's window. And these men are pumping gas and waiting tables. The drop on his forehead, his brow, the slope of his nose, the eyelashes and the curve of his eyes, the plastic profile of his mouth talking, these are all outlined in black against the stars. If we could put these men in training camps and finish raising them. All a gun does is focus an explosion in one direction. You have a class of young, strong men and women, and they want to give their lives to something. So clearly give your life that is about purpose or meaning. Advertising has these people chasing cars and clothes they don't need. Generations have been working in jobs they hate just so they can buy what they don't really need. So that's a good articulation of the bad faith that the current generation is living in, chasing things that advertising has told them they should buy, working jobs they hate just because society has told them that is good, or their parents have told them that is good, or their teachers have implicitly implied that that is good. We don't have a great war in our generation or a Great Depression, but we do. We have a great war of the spirit. We have a great revolution against the culture. The Great Depression is our lives. We have a spiritual depression. We have to show these men and women freedom by enslaving them, and show them courage by frightening them. So notice, right, Tyler Durden, through the mechanic's words here, is implying, right, the Great War. We don't have a World War II that provides clarity of purpose, where we're fighting the Nazis. We don't have a Great Depression like in the 1930s, where we are all trying to come together as a nation to figure out how to combat the worst economic depression in history. We have nothing great or defining in terms of our culture. All we have is a great war of the spirit. We have become spiritually spiritually dead. Our culture has led to an inauthentic form of existence. And so the existentialists, even though it seems depressing at a first glance, don't want you to just dwell here. They don't want to just say, hey, your life is meaningless. No, but they want to use that starting point, just like Tyler, as a way to liberate yourself to find a more authentic life so that you don't spend your life in this world of bad faith making choices that aren't really your own choices and ignoring these realities so that at the end of your life you will be filled with regret. That's what the existentialists do not want. Authenticity is a key idea of existentialism, and clearly we have seen that authenticity is a key idea of this novel, which is why I think this connection between these philosophies makes sense. So that provides some clarity in terms of what's going on there. Let's hop on over now to chapter 20, to the Raymond K. Hessel scene. If you remember, this is just a guy who works at a convenience shop, and Tyler and the narrator decide to point a gun at his head and start asking him some questions. And let's go to the end of the chapter here, page 154. They start asking how he wanted to spend his life. And so notice, again, the gun pointed at Raymond K. Hessel would be a good symbol for confronting one's death, confronting one's mortality. You have to imagine, what if you knew you were going to die tomorrow? How would you spend your life differently? If you have had a near-death experience, you've probably experienced exactly the sensation that we're talking about before. So let's take a look. 154. How did you want to spend your life? If you could do anything in the world, make something up. You didn't know. Then you're dead right now, I said. I said, now turn your head. So obviously Raymond K. Hessel isn't literally dead, but the narrator is pointing out that Raymond's inability to articulate what he wants to do in his life, the fact that he has no authentic or affirmative vision of what would give his life meaning or purpose, it means that he is metaphorically dead right now. All right? Let's keep going. Death to commence in 10, in 9, in 8. A vet, you said. You wanted to be a vet, a veterinarian. That means animals. You have to go to school for that. It means too much school, you said. You could be in school working your ass off, Raymond Hessel, or you could be dead. You choose. I stuffed your wallet into your back pocket of your jeans. So you really wanted to be an animal doctor. I took the saltwater muzzle of your gun off one cheek and pressed it against the other. Is that what you've always wanted to be, Dr. Raymond K. Hessel, a veterinarian? They have that because he was stuttering because he's crying. Yeah. No shit? No, you meant yeah. No shit, yeah. Okay, I said, and I pressed the wet end of the muzzle to the tip of your chin and then to the tip of your nose, and everywhere I pressed the muzzle, it left a shining wet ring of your tears. So I said, go back to school. If you wake up tomorrow morning, you find a way to get back into school. I pressed the wet end of the gun on each cheek and then on your chin and then against your forehead and left the muzzle pressed there. You might as well be dead right now, I said. I have your license. I know who you are. I know where you live. I'm keeping your license and I'm going to check on you, Mr. Raymond K. Hessel, in 3 months and then in 6 months and then in a year. And if you aren't back in school on your way to being a veterinarian, you will be dead. You didn't say anything. Get out of here and do your little life. But remember, I'm watching you, Raymond Hessel, and I'd rather kill you than see you working a shit job for just enough money to buy cheese and watch television. Now I'm going to walk away so you don't turn around. This is what Tyler wants me to do. These are Tyler words coming out of my mouth. I am Tyler's mouth. I am Tyler's hands. Everybody in Project Mayhem is part of Tyler Durden, and vice versa. Raymond K. Hessel, your dinner is going to taste better than any meal you've ever eaten, and tomorrow will be the most beautiful day of your entire life. So obviously a pretty intense way to implement the existentialist philosophy that we were just talking about, like literally pointing a gun at someone. But hopefully you can see the positive aspect of what Tyler Durden's philosophy is all about, which is about liberating individuals like Raymond K. Hessel, who seem metaphorically dead, who have nothing to live for, liberating them from a more petty or purposeless or inauthentic existence and freeing them through that confrontation with death to realize that with their limited time on earth, they should be spending every moment as authentically and meaningfully as possible, right? Cut out the unnecessary things. Cut out the aspects of your life that get in the way of a more authentic and liberated existence, that get you in touch with who you really want to be, that prevent you from being the most self-actualized, self-realized version of yourself. and also appreciating it. Once you confront your mortality, everything else becomes a little bit more meaningful. Your food will taste better. The day will seem more meaningful, so on and so forth. So hopefully you can appreciate this. And I think the important thing about the existentialist philosophy is that you don't need to have a literal confrontation. You don't need to have a literal gun pointed at you or a car coming at you or a near-death experience in order to recognize these facts. The existentialists very much were interested in the way in which intellectually you can have this confrontation or this acknowledgement of the inevitability of your demise and use that angst that you will experience if you truly contemplate it in a genuine way to liberate yourself to do more meaningful things. So this is part one of this lecture, and I think it gives us a good understanding of what's going on with Durden's philosophy, certainly the good aspects of it, right? And I think it's heavily linked to the idea of existentialism, of confronting these things that seem bad on the surface, that actually most of our existence tries to hide. Most of society and our lives are about trying to avoid the inevitability of death or trying to mitigate the amount of suffering and pain that we experience. And Tyler is saying no, and the existentialists are saying no. Confront that pain, lean into it, lean into the suffering and the inevitability of death. Yes, it will not be a pleasant experience at first, just like the lie on the narrator's hand burning is not a positive experience at first. But once you accept and embrace those facts, and you can realize, you can let go of all of these inauthentic forms of your existence and be liberated to have a more authentic existence. So, those are the good aspects of Durden's philosophy. In part two, what I'm going to do is start discussing the aspects of Tyler Durden and Fight Club and Project Mayhem that might be problematic, that might prevent us from interpreting him as the solution. I think especially in both the book and the movie, Tyler Durden is such an appealing and charismatic character. It's easy to get lost in his philosophical vision and think that that is what the author or the director are positing is the solution to these problems. However, I think if we do a close reading of the text, we can see it's a little bit more nuanced.